Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel beneath Kepler-7's main deck. The mining station had been his home for 8 months now, floating in the asteroid belt 40 million miles from Earth. He knew every pipe, every wire, and every rivet that held this place together. That's why the scratching sounds bothered him so much. It started 3 weeks ago during his night shift. Just a faint scraping noise that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. Jake first heard it while checking the air recycling systems. In Section C, he stopped working and listened carefully, but the sound vanished as quickly as it came. He thought maybe it was just metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. Space stations made all kinds of noises, but the scratching came back the next night and the night after that. Always during his shift, always when he was alone. It followed him through different sections of the station, like something was moving through the walls, keeping pace with his movements. The sound was rhythmic, almost like Morse code, but not quite. It reminded Jake of fingernails dragging across metal, except fingernails couldn't make sounds that loud. Jake mentioned it to his supervisor, Pete Collins, during their morning briefing. Pete was the security chief, a big man with graying hair who had worked on mining stations for 15 years. He listened to Jake's description with a skeptical expression. "Sounds like you need more sleep, Morrison," Pete said, sipping his coffee. "These long shifts can mess with your head." "I've seen it happen before. I'm getting plenty of sleep," Jake insisted. "This is real. Something is moving inside the walls," Pete shrugged. "Even if something was in there, what could it be? We're in deep space. There's nothing alive out here except us." Dr. Amy Rodriguez overheard their conversation from the next table in the cafeteria. She was the station's science officer, a small woman with dark hair who studied the asteroid samples they collected. "Actually," she said, turning toward them, "there are theories about organisms that could survive in space. Extremophiles that live in conditions we thought were impossible." Pete rolled his eyes. "Great, now you're encouraging." Amy ignored Pete's comment and looked at Jake with interest. "Can you describe the sound more specifically? Is it constant or does it come in patterns?" Jake thought for a moment. "It comes in bursts. Like scratch, 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 then a pause, then scratch, scratch, scratch. It's always different numbers, but there's definitely a pattern." "That's fascinating," Amy said. "If something was trying to communicate, that's exactly how it might sound." Pete stood up and collected his tray. "You scientists watch too many movies. Next thing you'll be telling me we have aliens living in our walls." He walked away shaking his head, but Amy stayed and asked Jake more questions. She wanted to know exactly where he heard the sounds, what time they occurred, and how long they lasted. Jake appreciated that someone was taking him seriously, even if Pete thought he was losing his mind. That night, Jake decided to record the scratching sounds on his tablet. He moved through his usual maintenance route, checking systems and waiting. Around 2 in the morning, while he was inspecting the water purification unit in Section D, the scratching started again. This time it was louder and more insistent than before. Jake quickly activated his tablet's recording function and held it against the wall where the sound was strongest. The scratching continued for almost 5 minutes, creating a complex pattern of short and long sequences. When it finally stopped, Jake played back the recording. The sound was clear and undeniable. No one could claim he was imagining this. He brought the recording to Amy the next morning. She listened to it 3 times, making notes on her tablet. Her eyes grew wider with each replay. "Jake, this is incredible," she said. "Listen to this pattern here." She played a section of the recording. "And now listen to this part from 2 minutes later." She played another section. "Do you hear how similar they are? This isn't random noise. Something is definitely trying to communicate." Word spread quickly through the station. Commander Lisa Kane, who ran Kepler-7, called a meeting that afternoon. She was a tall woman with short blonde hair who had commanded 3 different space stations during her career. She listened to Jake's recording with a serious expression. "I want a full diagnostic of all systems in Section C and D," she announced. "Check for loose panels, damaged pipes, anything that could be making this noise." Carl Davis, the chief engineer, nodded. I'll run a complete scan. If there's something mechanical causing this, we'll find it. But the diagnostic found nothing wrong. Every system checked out perfectly. The walls were solid, the pipes were secure, and there were no loose components anywhere. According to the station's sensors, nothing should be making scratching sounds. Inside the walls, the scratching continued every night, growing louder and more persistent. Other crew members started hearing it too. Sue Palmer, who worked the midnight shift in the mining control room, reported scratching sounds near the ore processing facility. Ron Hughes heard it in the communications array. Even Pete Collins admitted. He heard something strange while doing his security rounds. Jake started mapping where the sounds occurred. He marked each location on the station's blueprint and noticed something strange. The scratching seemed to follow pathways that didn't match any of the station's official systems. It was like something was moving through spaces that shouldn't exist. One night, while following the sound through Section E, Jake discovered something that made his blood run cold. Behind a maintenance panel that should have led to a small utility closet, he found a tunnel. Not a maintenance tunnel or service corridor that appeared on any blueprint, but a tunnel that extended into the station's superstructure where nothing should be able to fit. The tunnel was smooth and curved, about 3 feet in diameter. It looked almost organic, like it had been carved rather than built. Jake shined his flashlight into the darkness, but he couldn't see the end. A faint breeze blew from somewhere deep inside, carrying a strange smell that reminded him of copper. An ozone. Jake backed away from the tunnel and sealed the panel. His hands were shaking as he called Commander Kane on his radio. "Commander, you need to see this," he said. "I found where the scratching is coming from." Commander Kane arrived at Jake's location within 20 minutes. Followed by Dr. Amy Rodriguez and Chief Engineer Carl Davis, Pete Collins brought up the rear, his hand resting on the stun weapon at his belt. The group gathered around the maintenance panel as Jake carefully opened it again. "Sweet mother of pearl," Carl whispered as his flashlight beam disappeared into the smooth tunnel. "That wasn't here when we built this station. I supervised the construction of this entire section myself." Amy knelt down and examined the tunnel entrance with her scientific scanner. "The material is definitely not human-made," she said, running her fingers along the smooth surface. "It feels organic, almost like bone or cartilage, but it's incredibly strong. My scanner shows it extends at least 50 meters in 3 different directions." Commander Kane made a decision that would change everything. "We're going in. Rodriguez, you take point with your scanners. Davis, bring your engineering tools. Collins, watch our backs. Morrison, you found this thing, so you're coming with us?" Jake's stomach twisted with nervousness, but he nodded. The tunnel was just wide enough for them to crawl through single file. Amy went first, her scanner casting an eerie blue glow on the tunnel walls. The surface felt warm to the touch, and Jake could swear he felt a faint pulse, like a heartbeat, after. Crawling for about 30 meters, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The team emerged one by one, their flashlights revealing an incredible sight. The chamber was roughly spherical, about 10 meters across, with 6 other tunnels branching off in different directions. But what made everyone gasp was the technology. The walls were covered with what looked like a combination of organic tissue and mechanical components. Thin cables that resembled veins pulsed with soft bioluminescent light. Strange devices that looked grown rather than built hung from the ceiling, like fruit from a tree. The air hummed with quiet energy. "This is impossible," Carl said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're inside the station's hull. There's no room for a chamber this size. According to the blueprints, we should be looking at the outer wall. Right now, Amy was taking readings with every instrument she had. The space seems to exist in a pocket dimension of some sort. The geometry doesn't match our 3-dimensional understanding. And look at this." She pointed to one of the wall. "Devices. It's connected to our power grid, but it's also feeding energy back into our systems. Our station is running more efficiently than it should be." As they explored the chamber, Jake noticed movement in one of the side tunnels. Something small and dark scurried away from their lights. "Did you see that?" He asked Dot before anyone could answer. Scratching sounds filled the chamber. But this time they came from all around them. The walls themselves seemed to be responding to their presence. The bioluminescent cables pulsed faster, and the hanging devices began to emit soft musical tones. "They know we're here," Amy said, with excitement. "Whatever built this place, they're aware of us." Pete drew his stun weapon. "Maybe we should get out of here before they decide we're not welcome," but Amy held up her hand. "Wait, listen to the pattern." The scratching sounds were definitely organized now, coming in precise sequences. "It's the same pattern Jake recorded, but more complex. They're trying to communicate." Carl was examining one of the wall devices more closely. "Commander, you need to see this. This thing is connected to our air recycling system, but it's not just connected, it's improving it. Our air quality readings have been perfect for weeks, and I couldn't figure out why. These creatures have been upgrading our life support systems." Amy pulled out her tablet and started playing mathematical sequences through its speaker. Prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The scratching sounds stopped immediately. For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the humming of the strange technology. Then the response came. The walls lit up with patterns of bioluminescent pulses that matched Amy's sequence perfectly, then continued 13, 17, 19, 23, the next prime numbers in the sequence. "Incredible," Amy breathed. "They understand mathematics. This is first contact with an alien intelligence." The creatures began to show themselves. Small beings about the size of house cats emerged from the tunnels. They looked like a cross between insects and crabs, with multiple legs and delicate manipulator arms. Their shells were dark and smooth, and they moved with careful precision. Most remarkably, they seemed to have integrated mechanical components into their bodies. Tiny lights blinked along their shells, and some had tool-like appendages that looked both grown and built. One of the creatures approached Amy's tablet, moving slowly to show it meant no harm. It touched the device with one of its manipulator arms, and suddenly mathematical equations appeared on the screen. Complex formulas that Carl recognized as engineering calculations for improving energy efficiency. "They've been studying our technology?" Carl said in amazement. "These equations would make our fusion reactor 15% more efficient. They've been watching us work and figuring out how to make our systems better." More creatures appeared, dozens of them. They moved through the chamber like a well-organized team, each one focused on different tasks. Some tended to the growing devices on the walls, others worked on extending the tunnel network, and a few gathered around the humans with obvious curiosity. Commander Kane found her voice. "How long have you been here? How long have you been watching us?" The creatures communicated through a combination of scratching sounds, bioluminescent displays, and direct interface with electronic devices. Using Amy's tablet as a translator, they began to tell their story. They called themselves something that roughly translated to architects. They had been following human expansion into space for decades, studying human engineering and technology. They were fascinated by humanity's approach to building things. Most species they had encountered built elegant, efficient systems that worked perfectly under ideal conditions. Humans built robust, adaptable systems that kept working even when everything went wrong. The architects had been living in the walls of Kepler-7 since shortly after its construction. They had been quietly improving systems, fixing problems before they became critical, and studying how humans responded to challenges. They meant no harm and had actually been protecting the station from several potential disasters. "You mean you've been our guardian angels this whole time?" Jake asked. The creatures pulsed with what seemed like amusement. Through the tablet, they explained that they had prevented 3 major system failures, rerouted power during solar storms, and even repaired microfractures in the hull that the human crew never detected. Amy looked at her readings again. "Commander, this changes everything. We're not just dealing with alien visitors. We're dealing with aliens who have been actively helping us survive." Over the next 3 days, the crew of Kepler-7 established regular communication with the architects. Amy Rodriguez spent most of her time in the hidden chamber, working with the creatures to improve their translation methods. What started as simple mathematical exchanges grew into complex conversations about engineering, physics, and the nature of space travel itself. The architects were eager to share information, but they insisted on showing rather than just telling. They guided Carl Davis through their modifications to the station's systems, revealing improvements that human engineers never would have thought possible. The fusion reactor was running at 118% of its rated efficiency. The air recyclers were producing cleaner atmosphere than Earth itself, and the artificial gravity generators were using 30% less power than their specifications required. "This is beyond anything we learned in engineering school," Carl told Commander Kane during their daily briefing. "They don't just fix problems, they fundamentally improve how everything works. It's like they see possibilities in our technology that we can't even imagine." But the real revelation came when the architects began sharing their star charts. Ben Cooper, the station's navigation officer, was studying alongside Amy when the creatures projected a three-dimensional map of the galaxy using their bioluminescent technology. The map showed thousands of star systems connected by lines that represented trade routes, communication networks, and territorial boundaries. "This is a map of galactic civilization," Ben said, his voice filled with awe. "There are hundreds of different species out there, maybe thousands." The architects confirmed this through their tablet interface. The galaxy was full of intelligent life, organized into a loose confederation they called the Collective. Most species had been spacefaring for millennia, developing technologies that made human engineering look primitive by comparison. Ships that could cross the galaxy in days, cities that floated in space without any visible means of support, and computers that could think faster than entire human civilizations. Amy asked the obvious question: "If there are so many advanced species, why are you interested in us? We're barely managing to build mining stations and transport ships." The response from the architects surprised everyone. Through a series of displays and calculations, they explained that human technology was unique in the galaxy. Most advanced species built systems that were elegant, efficient, and perfectly designed for specific purposes. These systems worked flawlessly under ideal conditions but failed catastrophically when faced with unexpected problems. Human technology was different. Humans built systems that were robust, adaptable, and seemingly crude by galactic standards. But human systems kept working even when they should have failed. They broke down gracefully, could be repaired with improvised parts, and somehow continued functioning far beyond their design limits. Carl listened to this explanation with growing amazement. "You're saying our technology is special because it's tough?" The architects showed them examples from their observations. When Kepler-7's main computer crashed 6 months ago, the human crew had bypassed the damaged systems and kept the station running, using backup computers that weren't designed for that purpose. When the water recycler failed, they had rigged a temporary solution using spare parts from 3 different systems. Most galactic species would have abandoned the station and built a new one rather than attempt such makeshift repairs. "Other species optimize for perfection," Amy translated from the creature's communications. "Humans optimize for survival." The architects revealed that they had been following human expansion into space for over 50 years. They had observed human colonies, mining operations, research stations, and transport ships. In every case, humans demonstrated the same pattern. When sophisticated systems failed, humans found ways to make primitive alternatives work. Commander Kane found this both flattering and concerning. "Are you saying we're being studied like laboratory animals?" The architect's response was more complex than a simple yes or no. They explained that the collective had protocols for observing emerging species. Most new civilizations followed predictable patterns of development. They built increasingly sophisticated technology until they either transcended their physical limitations or destroyed themselves trying. Humans were the first species the architects had encountered that seemed to be taking a completely different path. Instead of focusing on building perfect technology, humans built technology that could handle imperfection. Instead of creating systems that required ideal conditions, humans created systems that assumed things would go wrong. This approach was so unusual that the collective had sent the architects to study it more closely. Ben Cooper studied the galactic map more carefully and noticed something disturbing. Many of the star systems were marked with symbols that indicated abandoned civilizations. What happened to all these species? He asked. The answer was sobering. Most advanced civilizations eventually built technology so sophisticated that they became dependent on it. When their perfect systems encountered problems they weren't designed to handle, entire civilizations collapsed within decades. Wars were fought with weapons so precise that small malfunctions could destroy entire planets. Cities fell when their elegant life support systems failed and no one remembered how to build simpler alternatives. It's like the story of the Tower of Babel, Amy said quietly. They built so high that they forgot how to build foundations. The architects showed them recordings of these fallen civilizations. Beautiful crystal cities floating in space, empty and dark because their inhabitants had forgotten how to maintain them. Massive ships drifting between stars, their crews long. That because they couldn't repair systems they didn't understand. Entire worlds covered in the ruins of technology so advanced that it had become incomprehensible to its creators. Jake Morrison, who had started this entire discovery, asked the question that everyone was thinking. So what happens to us? Do we end up like them? The architect's response was surprisingly hopeful. Humans were already showing signs of a different evolutionary path. Human technology was becoming more sophisticated, but it retained its fundamental robustness. Human engineers still learned to repair things with their hands, still understood the basic principles behind their machines, and still approached problems with the assumption that simple solutions were often better than complex ones. Carl nodded thoughtfully. We still teach apprentices to use hammers before we teach them to use molecular assemblers. We still require engineers to understand basic mechanics before they learn quantum physics. The architects confirmed that this approach was almost unknown in galactic civilization. Most species moved quickly from primitive technology to advanced systems without maintaining knowledge of the intermediate steps. When their advanced systems failed, they had no fallback options. But this raises another question, Commander Kane said. What does the collective want with us? Are we specimens in some kind of experiment? The architect's lights pulsed in what seemed like excitement. They revealed that the collective was facing a crisis. Their perfect systems were becoming increasingly fragile as they grew more complex. Several member species had suffered catastrophic failures in recent decades, and the collective was desperately seeking solutions. The human approach to engineering represented a possible answer to their problems. If they could learn to build robust, adaptable systems like humans did, they might be able to prevent their civilization from collapsing under the weight of its own perfection. Amy realized the implications immediately. They don't want to study us. They want to learn from us. The revelation that the collective wanted to learn from humanity changed everything aboard Kepler-7 for 2 weeks. The crew worked closely with the architects, sharing knowledge and learning about galactic civilization. Amy Rodriguez became fluent in their communication methods, while Carl Davis studied their biotechnology with fascination. The collaboration was proceeding smoothly until the architects brought disturbing news. Their monitoring stations had detected a massive solar storm approaching from the nearby star system. This wasn't an ordinary solar flare, but a stellar catastrophe that occurred perhaps once every 1,000 years. The storm would arrive in 72 hours and would be powerful enough to overload most electronic systems within a radius of several million kilometers. Most galactic species would evacuate immediately, Amy translated as the architects explained the situation. Their standard protocol is to abandon any installations in the storm's path and rebuild them afterward. It's considered the only logical response to such overwhelming natural forces. Commander Kane studied the data the architects provided. The storm would last for 18 hours and would generate electromagnetic pulses strong enough to fry circuits. radiation levels that could kill unprotected humans in minutes, and gravitational fluctuations that could tear apart anything not properly anchored. By any reasonable standard, evacuation was the smart choice. How long would it take to evacuate the station? She asked Ben Cooper. Ben ran the calculations quickly. With our current transport capacity, we could get everyone off the station in about 6 hours. But we'd have to leave everything behind. The mining equipment, the processing facilities, 5 years of research data, everything. Pete Collins voiced what everyone was thinking. That's assuming the evacuation ships can even make it here before the storm hits. If we're unlucky with the timing, we could end up trapped. The architects were watching the human response with intense interest. Through their communications, they explained that this was exactly the kind of situation that revealed the fundamental differences between species. Advanced civilizations had learned to accept that some forces of nature were too powerful to resist. They built technology that was designed to be abandoned and replaced when necessary. But humans don't think that way, do they? Amy said, looking around at her crewmates. We don't like giving up. Jake Morrison had been quiet during the discussion, but now he spoke up. What if we don't evacuate? What if we try to ride out the storm? Carl Davis shook his head. Jake, this isn't like fixing a broken pipe. We're talking about forces that could vaporize the entire station. But the architects have been upgrading our systems for months, Jake insisted. And they understand this kind of storm better than we do. Maybe together we can find a way to survive it. The suggestion sparked immediate debate among the crew. Half thought it was suicide to stay, while the other half was intrigued by the challenge. The architects watched this discussion with what seemed like fascination, their bioluminescent displays pulsing in complex patterns. Commander Kane made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. We're staying. But not because I think we can definitely survive. We're staying because this is exactly the kind of problem humans are supposed to be good at solving. The next 72 hours became the most intense period in Kepler-7's history. The crew worked around the clock to prepare for the storm, guided by the architect's knowledge and driven by human determination to make the impossible work. Carl Davis led the effort to harden the station's electronics. Instead of relying on sophisticated shielding that might fail under extreme conditions, they used a combination of the architect's biotechnology and old-fashioned Faraday cages made from salvaged metal plating. Sue Palmore and Ron Hughes worked to create redundant power systems using spare parts from the mining equipment. Amy Rodriguez collaborated with the architects to develop biological solutions to radiation exposure. The creatures showed her how to create living filters that could absorb radiation and convert it into harmless energy. It was crude compared to galactic medical technology, but it could be grown from materials they had on hand. Jake Morrison took on the most dangerous job of all. He volunteered to monitor the station's structural integrity during the storm from the outside, wearing a modified spacesuit that combined human life support with architect biotechnology. If the station started to break apart, he would be the first to know and could potentially make emergency repairs. The architects were amazed by the human approach to the problem. Instead of building one perfect solution, the humans created multiple backup systems. Instead of relying on automation, they planned for human intervention at every step. Instead of trying to avoid all possible failures, they prepared to fix problems as they occurred. This is exactly what we hope to observe, Amy translated from the creature's excited communications. No other species approaches problems this way. They either solve everything in advance or accept failure as inevitable. As the storm approached, long-range sensors detected the first electromagnetic pulses. The station's most sensitive equipment began experiencing interference, and the artificial gravity fluctuated slightly. Commander Kane ordered all non-essential personnel to the most protected areas of the station, but the essential crew remained. At their posts, the storm hit like a hammer blow from space itself. The first wave of radiation overloaded 3 backup power systems despite all their preparations. The electromagnetic pulses fried several communication arrays and knocked out the main computer twice. The structural stress caused microfractures. in the hull that had to be sealed immediately, but the station survived the initial assault. Carl's redundant systems kicked in when the primary systems failed. Amy's biological filters absorbed radiation that would have killed the crew otherwise. Jake's external monitoring allowed them to spot problems before they became catastrophic. The architects worked alongside the humans throughout the storm, their biotechnology adapting in real time to changing conditions. But what impressed them most was not their own contributions, but how the humans refused to give up when their preparations proved insufficient. When the primary life support system overloaded, Sue Palmer jury-rigged a replacement using parts from the kitchen recycler and the waste processing unit. When the radiation shielding failed in Section C, Ron Hughes created a temporary barrier using metallic asteroid samples and his own welding equipment. When the station's computer crashed for the third time, Ben Cooper bypassed it entirely and flew the station manually using backup navigation systems. They're not just solving problems. Amy translated the architect's amazed observations. They're solving problems that didn't exist when they started. They're adapting to failures they never anticipated. 18 hours after it began, the storm finally passed. Kepler-7 was battered, scarred, and running on systems that shouldn't have worked, but it was intact. More importantly, every member of the crew had survived. The architects were silent for a long time after the storm ended. When they finally communicated, their message was simple but profound. We understand now why the collective needs to learn from humanity. 3 days after the storm ended, Kepler-7 was running better than it ever had before. The emergency repairs and jury-rigged systems had somehow created a more efficient station than the original design. Carl Davis couldn't explain how Sue Palmer's kitchen recycler modifications had improved the life support system by 20%, or why Ron Hughes' welding patch job had actually strengthened the hull beyond its original specifications. The architects were studying every modification the humans had made during the storm. Their bioluminescent displays pulsed constantly as they analyzed how human desperation had led to engineering breakthroughs that violated conventional wisdom. What should have been temporary fixes had become permanent improvements. This is unprecedented. In galactic history, Amy Rodriguez translated from their excited communications. No species has ever improved their technology during a catastrophic failure. Most civilizations lose capability during disasters, but humans seem to gain it. Jake Morrison was back to his regular maintenance duties, but now the scratching in. The walls had become a symphony of collaboration. The architects had integrated their biotechnology with human systems so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Pipes that used to leak now sealed themselves. Circuits that used to overload now adapted to power fluctuations automatically. The station had become something entirely new. Commander Kane was reviewing the storm damage reports when the architects requested a formal meeting in their hidden chamber. The entire senior crew gathered there, now familiar with the organic technology that covered the walls. But this time, the chamber looked different. New devices had grown from the ceiling, and the bioluminescent patterns were more complex than ever before. "We have received authorization from the collective to make you an offer," Amy translated as the architects began their presentation, "but first we must explain what your survival of the storm means to our civilization." The creatures projected new star charts that showed recent disasters throughout galactic space. Advanced civilizations had been suffering increasing numbers of catastrophic failures as their technology became more sophisticated. Perfect systems that had worked flawlessly for centuries were suddenly failing in cascade effects that destroyed entire worlds. The Zephyrian Empire had lost 3 star systems when their automated defense network mistook a routine software update for an invasion and began attacking their own planets. The Crystalline Confederacy had abandoned their homeworld when their environmental control systems became so complex that no one understood how to repair them after a minor malfunction. Dozens of species were facing similar crises. "The galaxy is choking on its own perfection," Ben Cooper said as he studied the charts. "Their technology has become so advanced that it's become incomprehensible even to its creators. The architects confirmed this assessment. The collective had been searching for solutions for decades, but every approach they tried only made the problem worse. More sophisticated technology led to more catastrophic failures. Better automation created systems that were even harder to understand when they broke down. Then they had discovered humanity, a species that seemed to be evolving in the opposite direction from everyone else. Instead of building increasingly perfect systems, humans built increasingly robust ones. Instead of creating technology that worked flawlessly under ideal conditions, humans created technology that worked adequately under terrible conditions. What happened during the storm proved something that the collective thought was impossible, Amy translated. You didn't just survive a disaster that should have destroyed you, you became stronger because of it. Your technology improved under stress instead of failing. Pete Collins, who had been skeptical of the whole situation from the beginning, asked the obvious question, "So what do you want from us? Do you expect us to travel around the galaxy fixing everyone's problems?" The architect's response surprised everyone. They didn't want humans to fix galactic civilization. They wanted humans to teach galactic civilization how to fix itself. The collective was prepared to offer humanity membership as equal partners. Not as junior members or experimental subjects, equal partners? Commander Kane repeated. We barely have fusion reactors and you have technology we can't even understand. But that was exactly the point, the architects explained. The collective didn't need more advanced technology, they had plenty of that. What they needed was the human approach to using technology. They needed to learn how to build systems that could fail gracefully, how to create redundancies that actually worked, and how to fix problems with whatever materials were available. The offer was unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity would be invited to join the collective not as a primitive species to be uplifted, but as teachers who could show advanced civilizations how to survive their own sophistication. Human engineers would work with galactic scientists to redesign critical systems. Human maintenance crews would train alien specialists in the art of jury-rigging solutions. Human survival instincts would be studied and adapted by species that had forgotten how to improvise. Carl Davis laughed despite himself. So let me get this straight. We're being invited to join a galactic civilization because we're good at making broken things work? That's exactly right, Amy translated from the architect's amused response. In a galaxy full of species that build perfect things, you're the only ones who can fix them when they break. The crew of Kepler-7 spent hours discussing the implications. They would be humanity's first ambassadors to galactic civilization, pioneers in a relationship that could transform both human and alien societies. But they would also be guinea pigs in an experiment that had never been tried before. Jake Morrison, who had started this entire adventure by hearing scratching in the walls, had the final word. You know what? I've spent my whole career fixing things that weren't supposed to break. If we can do that for the whole galaxy, maybe we should give it a try. Commander Kane agreed to accept the collective's offer on behalf of humanity. The architects immediately began preparations to transform Kepler-7 into an embassy station where human and alien engineers could work together. The mining operation would continue, but it would become secondary to the more important work of teaching the galaxy how to embrace imperfection. Over the following months, Kepler-7 became the most important location in human space. Engineers from Earth came to learn from the architects, while alien representatives arrived to study human problem-solving methods. The station grew as both species contributed their knowledge and skills. The scratching in the walls became a constant sound. But now Jake Morrison knew what it meant. It was the sound of two very different civilizations learning to work together. The sound of practical human engineering combining with sophisticated alien biotechnology. The sound of a galaxy discovering that sometimes the best solution to a complex problem was to hit it with a hammer and see what happened. Amy Rodriguez established the first interspecies engineering school, where human apprentices learned to grow living tools while alien students learned to fix things with duct tape and determination. Carl Davis designed hybrid systems that combined the elegance of galactic technology with the robustness of human engineering. Even Pete Collins found his security skills in demand as other species learned that sometimes the best way to protect sophisticated systems was to have someone who understood how they could be broken. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not by becoming more advanced, but by staying true to the principles that had carried them from stone tools to star travel. In a universe full of perfect solutions, they had become the masters of good enough,